I didn't correct her when she called me just a cook. That was 6 years ago at my cousin's graduation party, when my aunt introduced me to her neighbor and said with this little laugh, "She works in a kitchen somewhere." I smiled. I said, "Nice to meet you." I didn't say anything else. My brother thought that was a character flaw. He told me once, a few months before everything happened, that I needed to learn how to market myself better. He said it like he was doing me a favor. His name is Connor. He's 31, 2 years older than me. He works in commercial real estate. He wears blazers to dinner even when nobody asked him to. I'm a chef. Not the kind that posts aesthetic food photos and calls herself a culinary creator. I mean, I actually run a kitchen. I went to culinary school in Portland at 21, worked the line at a restaurant in Denver for 3 years, got burned. Literally, I have a scar on my left forearm. Got better. Moved to Nashville when I was 26 because a James Beard semifinalist offered me a sous chef position, and then left that job 18 months later to open my own place. My restaurant is called Hollow and Stone. It seats 42 people. We're booked out 6 weeks. But none of that was true yet when my parents called me the December before my brother's engagement party. My mom did most of the talking. She always does. "We're doing a small dinner," she said. "Just immediate family and a few of Connor's colleagues. He's going to introduce everyone to Meredith officially." Meredith was his girlfriend. They'd been together almost 2 years. I'd met her once at Thanksgiving, and she'd asked me if I catered events, the way people ask if you do alterations when they find out you sew. Polite. Slightly condescending. I said not really and passed her the sweet potatoes. "Sounds good," I told my mom. "What time should I be there?" There was a pause. "Sweetie," she said, "the thing is, Connor asked if we could keep it more professional. His colleagues are going to be there, and Meredith's family is they're from Atlanta. Old money. And Connor just feels like with your job." I waited. "He doesn't want them getting the wrong idea," she said. "He wants them to see the family in a certain light. You understand." I understood. I said, "Okay." She sounded relieved, like I'd let her off the hook for something, which I had. I said goodbye and hung up and sat in my car in the parking lot of the restaurant supply store for probably 15 minutes without moving. My dad texted me that night. Just, "Sorry, kiddo. Connor gets like this." That was it. That was the apology. I didn't cry. I want to be honest about that. I'm not going to tell you I sat there and sobbed, because I didn't. What I felt was closer to something going very still inside me, like a door I'd been leaving slightly open for years just clicked shut. I went home. I made myself pasta, cacio e pepe, because it's what I make when I need to feel competent. And I didn't tell anyone what happened. Not my best friend Tessa. Not my roommate at the time. I just ate my pasta and went to bed. Let me back up. I grew up in Columbus, Ohio. My dad is a retired high school principal. My mom taught third grade for 23 years. Connor got a business degree from Ohio State, which in our family was treated like he had cured a disease. There were photos. There was a party. My grandmother made her good lasagna. When I said I wanted to go to culinary school, my mom sat down at the kitchen table like I'd told her someone died. "A cooking school," she said. "A culinary program," I said. "It's accredited. There's financial aid." "But what does that lead to, sweetheart?" "What's the actual career?" I tried to explain. I talked about restaurant management, about the industry, about the fact that the food service sector in the U.S. employs over 15 million people. She nodded the way she nodded when students in her class gave answers that were technically correct, but not what she was looking for. My dad was more measured. He said, "We just want to make sure you have options." Connor said, at dinner that same week, "You know dishwashers work in kitchens too." He thought it was funny. My parents didn't correct him. I went to culinary school anyway. I paid for it myself with loans and a part-time job at a catering company. My parents didn't come to graduation because it was the same weekend as Connor's firm's charity golf tournament, and he'd gotten them tickets, and it was too last minute to change plans. My mom sent flowers. They arrived a day late. I'm not telling you this to make them sound like monsters. They're not monsters. They're just people who had a very clear picture in their heads of what a successful life looked like, and I didn't fit into it, and they never quite knew what to do with me because of that. What they did was a lot of vague encouragement combined with consistent minimizing. How's the restaurant thing going? Not how's the restaurant, not how's work. The thing, always the thing. After the phone call about Connor's dinner, I let the door stay shut. I didn't make a big announcement. I didn't send an email. I just got quieter. I responded to group texts with less. I called on birthdays but kept it short. I didn't stop being their daughter. I just stopped auditioning for the role. And I worked. That fall, I had just signed a lease on a commercial space in East Nashville. It was a former auto shop, concrete floors, industrial bones, needed everything. I had a small business loan from Pinnacle Bank, a line of credit I'd spent 8 months qualifying for, and about $34,000 in personal savings I'd accumulated over 4 years of not spending money on anything except rent and kitchen equipment. I didn't have investors. I want to be clear about that because the comment I've seen most of my life is, well, you had help. I didn't have a family fund or a trust or a loan from a parent. I had a business plan I wrote at my kitchen table and a banker named Gerald who took a chance on me because I'd been a customer at that branch since I was 22 and I never once missed a payment on anything. The first 6 months were the kind of difficult that's hard to describe to anyone who hasn't done it. I was working the line myself because I couldn't afford a full kitchen crew yet. I was doing inventory at midnight. I had a two-top walk out on a tab once, $64, and I stood in the alley behind the restaurant and had to talk myself down from a panic spiral. $64. There were nights I questioned everything, but we were also doing something right. A food writer from the Nashville scene came in our third month and wrote 4 paragraphs about the duck confit and the way I sourced from 3 local farms within 40 miles of the city. People started making reservations, not in a flood, slowly the way something real builds. A table here, a repeat customer there, a birthday party that told everyone they knew. By the end of year 1, I had a line cook and a front of house manager. By the end of year 2, I had a full team and a wait list. I got nominated for a regional award I didn't win, but that got my name into some circles I hadn't been in before. I told my parents almost none of this, not because I was hiding it. It was more that every time I'd shared something in the past, it had been received with a sort of polite flatness that made me feel worse than if I'd said nothing. My mom would say, "That's wonderful, sweetie," in the same tone she used when I'd told her I learned to parallel park. My dad would pivot to asking if I had health insurance. Connor would find a way to mention his own news within 30 seconds. So I stopped sharing. And they stopped asking the right questions. And we reached this equilibrium where they didn't really know my life, and I didn't explain it to them, and we all coexisted at the surface level of a family that calls on holidays. A year and a half after I wasn't invited to that dinner, I got a corporate catering inquiry. I had started doing private events by then. Not my thing, really, but the margins were good, and it helped float the restaurant during slow months. I had an events coordinator, a woman named Patrice, who handled most of the initial inquiries and brought me in when they needed custom menu decisions. Patrice forwarded me an email. A company was planning their annual client appreciation dinner. High-end, private venue, 60 guests. They wanted to interview 2 or 3 caterers before committing. The name of the company in the email signature was Alderton and Cross. It didn't register right away. I knew Connor worked in commercial real estate. I did not, at that moment, connect the name of his firm in my head because I had honestly never paid that much attention to where he worked. He'd told me the name once, at Christmas maybe 3 years earlier, and I'd filed it somewhere I didn't access. Patrice and I went to the meeting. It was at a downtown office, the kind of space with glass walls and a view of the Cumberland River and a conference table that was probably imported. We were shown into a room and offered water, and then a woman walked in with a laptop and a folder, and a very specific kind of energy that I recognized immediately as someone who is good at her job and knows it. She introduced herself. Her name was Meredith. I watched her set her laptop down. I watched her open her folder. I watched her look up and meet my eyes across the conference table. I don't know what she saw on my face. I hope it was nothing, because I spent a full second doing something close to an internal systems check. Meredith. Connors. Meredith. The Meredith who was at Thanksgiving. The Meredith they flew in from Atlanta to meet at the dinner I wasn't invited to because I worked in a kitchen. She was now the corporate events director at Alderton and Cross, which was my brother's firm. She didn't recognize me. Why would she? We'd met once, 2 years ago, across a Thanksgiving table, and I was one of the people attached to a boyfriend she'd since gotten engaged to, and probably hadn't thought about much since. She looked at me the way you look at a vendor you're about to evaluate, pleasantly neutral. I introduced myself. I introduced Patrice. We sat down. I want to be careful here because I know how this part of the story sounds. People always assume there was a moment where I had to decide whether to reveal who I was, like it was some dramatic crossroads. It wasn't. I just did my job. I answered her questions about sourcing and pricing and dietary accommodations. I talked about the lamb shoulder I'd done for a 40-person dinner in September and showed her photos on my phone. Patrice walked her through our event logistics. Meredith was professional and specific and asked good questions. She was, genuinely, good at her job. I noticed that. At some point in the meeting, she asked me how long we'd been operating. I told her 3 years. She asked where the restaurant was. I told her. She typed something and then looked at her laptop screen and then looked back at me and I saw it happen. The small recalibration. She'd looked up hollow and stone. I don't know exactly what she found, but I had a pretty good idea. We had press by then. The James Beard semi-finalist I'd worked under had mentioned us in an interview. Nashville Lifestyles had done a piece in the spring. She said, "This is impressive." "Thank you," I said. At the end of the meeting, she said she wanted to see a full proposal and a sample menu before making a final decision. She shook my hand. I smiled. Patrice and I walked out through the glass-walled lobby and took the elevator down and didn't say anything to each other until we were outside on the sidewalk, and then Patrice said, "Okay, that went well," and I said, "Yeah." I didn't tell her. I went back to the restaurant and I made the proposal and I sent it. It was a good proposal. I put a lot of care into the sample menu, a fall tasting format, 7 courses, 2 options at each savory course, a wine pairing structure that Patrice's contact at a local sommelier group helped me put together. It was genuinely my best work. A week later, Meredith emailed to say they wanted to move forward with us. And then, 2 days after that, my mom called. She led with small talk, weather, her book club, something about a neighbor's dog. And then she said, almost carefully, "So Connor mentioned that Meredith hired a caterer for their company event." "Okay," I said. "He said it's someone local. In Nashville." I waited. He said Meredith told him the owner went to culinary school in Portland. The silence lasted maybe 3 seconds. "It's me," I said. "I know." My mom was quiet. Then, "She doesn't know, does she?" "She doesn't know you're Connor's sister. We haven't discussed it. How did this happen?" I almost laughed, not in a mean way. It was such a strange question. As if coincidence was something I had engineered. "She sent an inquiry," I said. "We went to a meeting. She hired us. That's it." My mom said, "You have to tell her." "I will," I said. "Before the event." There was a longer pause. Then my mom said, "Sweetheart, Connor's going to be upset." And there it was. Not, "Are you okay?" Not, "I didn't realize your business had gotten so, your restaurant is in the paper." Not even a simple, "I'm proud of you for this." Connor was going to be upset. I said, "I know." She said, "Maybe you should. Could someone else handle this event?" "One of your employees?" I said, "Mom, I'm not going to turn down a paying client because Connor might have feelings about it." She said, "I just don't want there to be drama." I said, "There won't be drama. I'll tell Meredith before the event. She can decide how she wants to proceed. It's her event." My mom said she needed to talk to my dad. I said, "Okay." We hung up. Connor called me that evening. I'll give him credit for one thing. He called instead of texting, which I think is the coward's method for conversations like this. He called, and when I picked up, he said, "Hey," and I said, "Hey." And then he said, "So Meredith told me about the caterer." "Yeah," I said. "I'm not trying to make this weird," he said, which is always what someone says right before they make something weird. "But I think you should probably disclose the relationship to Meredith or to someone at the firm. It's a conflict of interest." "It's not a conflict of interest," I said. "A conflict of interest is when I have something to gain by acting against my client's interests. I'm a caterer. My interest is to serve 60 people a great dinner." That doesn't change because we're related. Still, he said, I told Mom I'd tell Meredith before the event. I will. I just think it looks bad, he said. For who? I asked. He didn't answer that directly. Instead, he said, you could have said something in the meeting. She didn't recognize me, I said. It was a professional setting. I did my job. There was a pause. Then Connor said, You know, I always thought you had a chip on your shoulder about the whole culinary thing. I let that sit for a second. Connor, I said, do you know what our revenue was last year? He didn't say anything. I didn't tell him either. That wasn't the point. I just wanted him to sit with the fact that he didn't know, that he had never asked, that for 3 years he'd had a sister who owned a restaurant and was building something real, and he'd spent that time being vaguely embarrassed by her occupation and had never once asked a single question about it that wasn't rhetorical. I'll tell Meredith, I said. Have a good night, Connor. I called Meredith the next morning. I was professional. I told her who I was. I told her I understood if she wanted to find a different vendor, and I meant it. It was her call entirely, and I would have respected it without any hard feelings. I told her a proposal stood as submitted and the decision was completely hers. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, Did you know who I was when we were in the meeting? Yes, I said. I recognized you from when we met at Thanksgiving. Why didn't you say something? Because, I said, it was a professional meeting and you were evaluating vendors. I didn't think it was relevant. Another pause. Then she said, Okay, I want to keep moving forward with you. The proposal was the best one we received, but I need you to know I chose you on merit, not because of Connor. I know that, I said, and I want you to know the same goes for how we'll deliver the event. She said, Fair enough. That was the whole conversation. The event was in November. It was a Thursday evening. Private venue, just off Broadway. I had 4 people from my kitchen team and Patrice handling the floor with 2 additional servers we brought on for the night. I got there at noon for setup. The food was good. I say that without ego, it was just true. The lamb was right. The vegetarian course landed better than it did on paper, and the dessert, a brown butter pear tart with cardamom cream I'd been workshopping for 2 weeks, got 3 separate guests finding Patrice afterward to ask for the recipe. Meredith came back to the kitchen at the end of the night when most of the guests had filtered out. She said, This was exactly what we needed. She shook my hand again. She meant it. Connor was at the event, which I had expected. We nodded at each other from across the room. That was it. No conversation. He looked fine. His blazer was new. My parents found out about the event through Connor, I think. And then my mom called again about 3 weeks later. She started with book club again, and then she asked, How did it go? The dinner thing. It went well, I said. Good, she said. Then Connor said Meredith was very impressed. I'm glad, I said. You know, my mom said, and I could hear her choosing the words slowly, we always knew you were talented. We just didn't always know how to. I mean, the restaurant business is so hard, and we were worried. I know, I said. We should come visit, she said. Your dad and I. We've never actually been to your restaurant. That stopped me for a second. 3 years. Hollow and Stone had been open 3 years, and neither of my parents had been there. Connor had been in Nashville for a bachelor party 18 months ago and had texted me, in town for the weekend. Too crazy to get together, probably. I'd said, no worries, hope you have fun. Sure, I told my mom. Come whenever. I'll put you on the list. On the list? We have a wait list, I said, for reservations, but I'll put you on the owner's hold. She was quiet for a second. The owner's hold, she repeated. Yeah, I said. I'm not going to tell you that phone call fixed everything because it didn't. These things don't fix. They shift. My parents came to Nashville in the spring. My dad wore a button-down. My mom brought flowers, which was sweet, and they sat at table 7 and ate 7 courses, and my dad ordered the wine pairing and actually drank most of it, which I hadn't expected. At the end of the meal, my dad asked to come back to the kitchen. I showed him around. It's not a big kitchen, 40 square feet of actual line space, two prep tables, a walk-in that I picked out specifically for the temperature gradient. I showed him where I stand every night. He looked at everything quietly. Then he put his hand on my shoulder and said, "You did this." That was it. Just, "You did this." My mom was crying a little when we came back out, which embarrassed her, and she fanned her face and said something about the wine being very good, and I let her have that. Connor and Meredith got married that fall. I was not in the wedding party. I went because they invited me this time, and I sat with cousins I hadn't seen in years and ate the chicken that was probably from a hotel vendor and thought, not unkindly, about how I would have done it differently. He and I aren't close. I don't think we will be, not in the way siblings on TV are close. What we are is cordial. We text sometimes. He asked me once, kind of awkwardly, if I ever thought about opening a second location. I said I was thinking about it. He said that's smart. I said thanks. That's more than we had 2 years ago. Hollow and Stone is booked out 6 weeks now, like I said. I got a Michelin Biv Gourmand last spring, which is not a star, but is a thing people care about, and which I still feel strange and proud about, in equal measure. We're doing a private label hot sauce now, which was Patrice's idea and has turned into a real revenue line. I hired 2 line cooks this year. One of them is 23, fresh out of culinary school, and he came in for his interview with the same slightly defensive energy I remember having at that age, like he was braced for someone to tell him his degree wasn't serious. I didn't say anything about it. I just asked him what he wanted to learn. He said everything. I said good. That's the right answer. My parents follow Hollow and Stone on Instagram now. My mom comments on most of the food photos with a heart emoji. It's small. It means something to me anyway. Some doors don't reopen. The one I closed the night my mom called to tell me I wasn't welcome at my brother's dinner. That one stays shut. I don't miss what was behind it. I think I stopped missing it somewhere around year 2 of the restaurant, when I was too tired and too proud and too absorbed in what I was building to spend energy on a version of my family's approval that was never going to look the way I needed it to. What I have instead is this: a kitchen I designed myself, a team that shows up, a room full of people every Thursday through Sunday who chose to be there because they trust what we make. That turned out to be enough. It turned out to be more than enough. I thought a lot about why I didn't say anything when my mom called that night. Not to Tessa, not to anyone. I just made pasta and went to bed. For a long time, I told myself it was self-protection, but I think the real reason is simpler than that. I already knew the argument wouldn't land. When someone has decided what you are, facts don't move them. Only time does. Only the weight of what you've actually built, sitting there undeniable, does. Connor didn't decide to disrespect me in some deliberate, calculated way. I want to be honest about that too. He absorbed a set of values from somewhere, from our parents, from his industry, from whatever room he'd spent his 20s trying to belong to. And those values said that a person's worth was visible. It lived in the title on a business card, the neighborhood you lived in, whether the work you did could be explained at a dinner party without watching someone's eyes gloss over. I didn't fit that, so he made me smaller in his mind until I was a size that didn't bother him. What I've learned, slowly, the way you learn things that actually stick, is that you cannot build yourself up while also waiting for someone else to see it. Those are 2 different projects and they run on different fuel. I spent probably the first 2 years of the restaurant doing both at the same time, and the second project was quietly draining the first. Every time I didn't tell my parents about a press mention, every time I didn't correct my aunt's "she works in a kitchen somewhere," I told myself I was being the bigger person. What I was actually doing was starving a part of myself that needed to just say, I made this. This is mine. This is real. The moment that shifted things wasn't the Alderton and Crosshaven. It was the phone call with my mom afterward when she asked if someone else could handle it. And I said no. Not angrily, not with a speech. Just, no, this is my business and I don't turn down paying clients to manage other people's comfort. That was the first time in my adult life I'd held a boundary with my family without apologizing for it. And the strange thing is, nothing broke. Connor was upset for a while. My mom had her feelings. And then everyone moved on because that's what people do when you stop making their discomfort your emergency. Meredith chose us on merit. That detail matters to me more than any other part of the story. Not because it validated me, I'd stopped needing that kind of external signal around year two, but because it confirmed something I'd suspected about integrity, that doing good work in private, without an audience, without recognition, is not wasted. It compounds. It builds the kind of thing that speaks for itself when you walk into a glass-walled conference room and a stranger opens your website and says, sincerely, "This is impressive." My dad standing in my kitchen, looking at the line I'd built, saying, "You did this." That was enough. It was late and it was incomplete, and I'm not going to pretend it repaired everything that had been worn down over the years, but it was real. And real, even when it's small, is the only currency that actually holds its value. The door I closed the night of that phone call. I don't regret closing it. What I had to learn was that closing it didn't mean locking everyone out permanently. It meant I stopped letting people walk through it without noticing what was inside.